Association has gone virtual for now, but while we'd love to see you everyone in person, it's great that we're able to see and to welcome alumni and friends from across the country for today's presentation, which is hosted by the Orange County Torero Club. Of course, you can find out about all kinds of events on our website, and please take a moment when you're there to check out our Hire USD campaign, an effort from the Alumni Association and Career Development Center to build awareness about the importance of toreros hiring toreros. If you or your company has an open position, consider USD first. Learn about Hire USD, related programming, and how to post a job under the Benefits tab at alumni.sandiego.edu. And I want to say these, as you all know, are challenging times, and we send good wishes for safety, health, and happiness to you and your loved ones. We want to express gratitude to you for supporting our efforts by tuning in tonight, and to our volunteers for all they do to help us engage and enrich the Torero community. We're also grateful for our guest today. Dr. Richard Miller is USD's Interim Vice Provost for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, serving a one-year appointment while the university conducts a national search for a permanent Vice Provost. Dr. Miller's investment in the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion spans over 43 years of expansive leadership in higher education as professor, dean, director, and senior vice president. Most recently, he served for 12 years as vice provost and chief diversity officer at Western Kentucky University. Before he began his life in higher education, after graduating with his bachelor's degree, he was drafted into the San Francisco Giants organization as a minor league baseball player. He holds bachelor's and master's degrees from Ithaca College and a DPE from Springfield College. And joining Dr. Miller for our program is Vince Moiso. Vince is a former scholar athlete from the class of 1995 at USD. He is a principal and president of Oceanside Glass and Tile, and also the founder and president of his own consulting and financial planning business. His wife Shelby is from the class of 1994, and their daughter Viviana is a member of the class of 2024. Vince has served on the Orange County Torero Club leadership team, helped launch the Torero Football Club, and is president-elect of the Alumni Association Board of Directors. And a couple of housekeeping items. Be sure you're on mute for the first part of our program. And we invite you to turn your cameras off for the first part of the program. We also recommend you hide non-video participants and then click to speaker view. We've compiled your questions from the registration forms, and we also hope to have time at the end of the program for additional audience questions. But for now, that's it for me. Vince, take it away.
Thanks, Charles, and happy to be here this lovely evening with a lot of other fellow USD alumni and fans of the University of San Diego. And Dr. Miller, I am just so excited to be here with you tonight. Long time coming, right? And we've spoken a few times leading up to tonight. So why don't you kick us off and can you give us some off the page information about yourself? You know, something that someone can't go online and find in your bio, or I'm sure most of us have read USD magazine and the great article that they put out on you. So give us something a little off the page.
Well, thanks, Vince. First of all, I am absolutely delighted to have an opportunity to chat with the alums of USC. I'm a former president of the Alumni Association at Ithaca College, so I can certainly relate to the commitment that all of you have in supporting your alma mater. There are a couple of things that not very many people know about me. One is that when I was drafted, when I graduated from college, I was drafted by the San Francisco Giants. And of course, I was so excited because some of my favorite players were Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Junior Gilliam, Jackie Robinson. Those were all my heroes growing up. So I've always wanted to play baseball ever since I was 8 years old. So when I had the opportunity to be a professional player, it was kind of a dream come true. Well, my very first 2 at-bats as a professional baseball player wearing a Giants uniform were 2 home runs. So not many people know about that. I don't even think I mentioned it to my wife. But so my first 2 times up as a professional baseball player, I hit 2 home runs, and you can use that as a trivia question if you'd like. The second thing that very few people know about me is that I love to sing. I've been a singer for, oh my goodness, for many, many years. And I had the pleasure of singing twice with a group in Carnegie Hall in New York City. And my ultimate ambition is to be able to sing and dance on Broadway. That's just the ham in me. But that's many people don't realize what I would like to do. But that's what I would like to do.
What's your favorite Broadway musical then?
Smokey Joe's Cafe.
Can I put you on the spot? Can you give us a bar? And now I got to hear it. I didn't even know that about you.
Well, I'll give you a little bit of Mozart, okay? Donnez-moi à tous ex gloria, tilia biris hominos deum fidelium dem fantorum. That's a little bit from Mozart's Requiem.
I love it. Thank you for that. That's a heck of a way to start the night. Thanks so much. I learned something new, and I appreciate you sharing that. So let's jump in. I know our time is short tonight together, and we have a lot to cover. I know when you and I spoke before, we thought, boy, how the heck are we going to fit all of this into the time that we have tonight? So let's just start off. How did you come to be at the University of San Diego?
Well, when the university had a failed search for its vice provost for diversity, equity, and inclusion, my name was recommended to Provost Baker as an individual who they thought I could come to USD and be an asset for the year that I'm here, and to assess some of the challenges of the university when it comes to DE&I. And so she called me, we had a nice conversation, and the next thing I know, she invited me to come to the university and serve as the interim vice provost for the year. Well, I'd been to San Diego before, years ago, and I just absolutely loved the city. So it was a good opportunity for me to come back and spend a little bit more time and get to know the university a little better. So that's how it happened.
Well, heck of a way for it to happen, right? And as I've gotten to know you, I'm sure the university is very thankful to have you, even in the short amount of time that we get you. So speaking of that, you know, you're the interim DEI, right? So Vice Provost for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I remember when we spoke, you mentioned that like that wasn't the title when they were talking to you. And there was a lot of discussion around what was the appropriate title. And I'd love for you to share that with everybody on this call. You know, what does that title mean to you, and what was the process and the importance of that title?
Yeah, positions and titles are very important in this kind of work. When colleges and universities started moving more aggressively to hiring individuals to focus more attention in DE&I, you first started hearing titles such as Chief Diversity Officer. And what happened was many institutions put people in these positions that really weren't adequately prepared for these positions. It was kind of a learn on the job kind of a responsibility. In many cases, there were very few resources that institutions made available to help these individuals move in these positions. But as the positions grew and the responsibilities grew and the issues grew, then administrators started thinking about, well, we need we need to put these people in positions of higher responsibility. So then you started seeing titles such as Vice Chancellor for Diversity, or Vice Provost for Diversity, positions like that. And so along with those vice positions, those higher administrative positions became more focused and more prevalent. And so the responsibilities grew as the titles kind of reflected that it was a higher administrative role than simply one of Chief Diversity Officer. And so as it started out at USD, it was Chief Diversity Officer, but I think the president and the provost recognized that the role needed to be a bit broader and more responsive to the needs of the institution. And so they changed the title to Vice Provost.
Well, and appropriate to have equity and inclusion. Inclusion, I think, for me being very, very important. Now for everybody on this call, I want to mention to you, interim. Really, when I said it was a short time, we only have the pleasure of having Dr. Miller here for the fiscal year. So for the University of San Diego, if you didn't know that, that means June 30th, 2021 is when his term ends here. So, wow, what a short time to have a big impact and set up this position for success, and set up the university for success with how important that is. So, what have you already accomplished in your time here? And we talked about this. It's picture it's June 30th, right, already, and you're looking back, and what did you accomplish in your time here?
Well, I think the advantage that I had was I was coming to a university with no background information. That is to say, I didn't have the history of the university. And I was bringing in kind of an objective perspective on DE&I that I thought would be of value to the institution. So it was an advantage. Usually when someone comes in brand new, they have an open mind. They don't have the history of what's happened in the past. Administrators tend to listen to these individuals because they bring to the university different perspectives from having been in similar positions at other institutions. And so I would ask questions about, well, how is it done this way? And I'm saying to them, well, that's okay, but have you considered a different approach? Have you considered a different perspective on how do you deal with hiring of Black faculty, for example? What strategies have you used in the past? What are some of the strategies of recruiting minority students to the institution? Because obviously that's a major objective of USD. How do you make the institution a more welcoming institution to people of color? Here are some strategies that I think you may want to consider that may not have been considered in the past. So I think coming in with a different perspective, looking at different ways of doing things, different approaches that the institution may want to consider, was an advantage.
So what are you, thank you for sharing that. And certainly I would say this, that trickles up and down, right? From faculty to staff to students to alumni, and employees. I mean, I just, across the board with the university and certainly with the board of directors, we need that change. We need to look and feel, like the alumni at large and the student body at large. And I think that's important. Now, so how are you going to define success? I'm curious about that. What's success for you? So, as you walk away from your short time here, what makes it a successful venture for you?
Well, I've had the freedom of being able to make recommendations based upon some of the things that I've experienced in the past that have worked pretty well. And I've met with a fair amount of receptivity to some of the recommendations that I'm that I'm sharing. For example, a minority faculty hiring plan that I've used at other institutions that have been very successful. It's an incentive-based plan. Presidential Diversity Award presentations. How to focus attention on diversity planning. For example, when I looked at the diversity plan of the institution, I came to the conclusion that it's really not a very effective plan. It didn't have the basic elements of a plan. So here are some ideas that I wanted to share with the institution to consider in framing diversity plans. The one thing about USD that I found so fascinating was that there is a lot of diversity related work going on in so many different units of the institution, but it's not well coordinated. The right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And so the framework that I shared with the president and provost was a plan to bring more collaboration and coordination to diversity planning in each of the units of the institution so that it meets the institution's goals, as it relates to a more welcoming environment. So I consider it a success when there is some receptivity to all of this. And I've experienced the fact that they have been receptive to a lot of these recommendations that I put on paper, including the fiscal implications and the personnel implications. You can't have a plan without including the fiscal implications of the plan. And you want to know what the resources are going to be so that at the end of 6 years, you can hire 30 minority faculty, for example. So the receptivity has been really good, and I consider that to be a successful effort on my part.
That's great to hear. You keep saying what I keep hearing from you, and I heard it from you before, and I had previously made a note of it where you talk about making the university more welcoming, and I would love for you to expand on that. So what does that mean to you? And then all of this advice that you're providing and making changes and things that we can do to do that. How does that then make the university more welcoming?
Well, I think the events that have occurred across our country over the last couple of years has required every institution, especially predominantly white institutions, to take a look at its culture. And in order to affect an institution to become more welcoming to minority individuals, there may necessarily be a change in the culture, and this isn't going to happen overnight. But people need to take a look. For example, situations such as implicit bias, systemic racism, these terms, and even Black Lives Matter, which is probably one of the most bastardized terms out there. But people need to wade into those terms and be willing to understand and be willing to be able to learn. There are a number of individuals who are very uncomfortable talking about race and all aspects of race, and that's okay. There's a phrase out there right now that it's comfortable to be uncomfortable. It's okay to be uncomfortable. But you would hope that individuals, after a period of time getting to know you, that they feel comfortable enough to begin to ask the kinds of questions that they wanted to ask, but were reluctant to ask for fear of being politically incorrect or showing their ignorance. So I think the institution needs to have individuals that are comfortable with each other in being able to exchange and dialogue the concerns that they have, and that they are willing to ask the kinds of questions that they have always wanted to ask, but were reluctant to do so. So that slight change in culture, I think, is infectious, and it begins to grow. Now, there are traditions in academia that are very, very hard to get away from. I'm very familiar with faculty. I mean, faculty are very conservative for the most part. They don't like to change. They really don't. But if you ask the right questions, then they start thinking, well, maybe this is more advantageous for us to change our views and perspectives so that the institution is much more receptive to change. And that's for the better. Well
said. I agree. Well, okay, great transition into this next question then for you. So, what you've told us is, how you've interacted with leadership, of course, and sounds like the leadership at the university has been incredibly receptive to the ideas that you've brought to the table, and I love hearing that. So, what about students and faculty and alumni? How can we all help accomplish this?
Well, one of the interesting things I experienced when I arrived was that there were 2 letters sent to the administration, one from the Black students and another from the Black faculty. And the letter indicated a number of issues that the students and the faculty were very concerned about. And some people would look at these as demands. I just looked at them as concerns, and the institution needs to take a look at them seriously. One of the concerns was that the institution wasn't very active. It wasn't proactive. It was more reactive than it was proactive in dealing with some of these issues. And there's nothing wrong with that recognition, but I found that the president and the provost and all of the vice presidents at the institution were much more concerned about being proactive, listening to what the concerns are and how can we make things happen rather than how can we address the barriers that make those things difficult to occur. And I found that the president and the provost and the vice presidents all were of the view that let's see what we can do to successfully address some of these concerns rather than make excuses as to the reasons why we can't address some of these issues. So Jim and Gail and all the other folks, the strategic leadership team have been very, very passionate about looking for ways to make things happen and address the issues that have been brought to their attention by the students and the faculty.
But I think what I'm also hearing you say too is that, as culture shifts, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, just in, I experienced it and have experienced it in business. Culture shift is so important. And I think I'm hearing you also say, students and faculty and even alumni for that matter should feel very comfortable to speak out and speak up. And then as the culture shifts, I heard you say the word, it does become infectious. And there is this level of comfort that we can speak about it and not be afraid to speak about it and collaborate on just getting better and then becoming welcoming, as you put it. I love what I'm hearing. So you mentioned to me, something else, and this really stuck with me when you said this, and you said, I expect there will be some pushback, and that doesn't deter me at all. So, when I heard that, you've experienced pushback, I think, and you're not deterred by it. And I would love for you to expand on that a little bit. And what can we, in your experience, what type of pushback can we expect, and how do we work through that?
Yeah, change is threatening to a lot of people. And that's just a part of, the academic enterprise. You can engage in discourse that is not necessarily agreeable, but it has to be respectful. One thing, and I made it clear when I first came here, I do not tolerate disrespect at all. And in my experience, I've had a few examples of that. And I respond very aggressively when it comes to that kind of thing. I will not tolerate disrespect. I will understand and tolerate discourse that is controversial in some cases, and not everyone is going to agree. but you can do it in a civil manner. So yes, anytime I've made some recommendations at another institution that kind of flew in the face of some faculty who felt that their traditions were being challenged. And just as an example, you know, when we talk about scholarship among our faculty, there is such a thing as very adequate peer-reviewed Black scholarship and Black journals, refereed journals. For some of our white faculty, that's very odd, very different. They didn't consider that to be scholarship unless it was published in a refereed journal that is well known, you know, the Journal of Psychological whatever, or the Journal of Applied Physiology. No, if it was published in a journal of African American musicians, for example, peer-reviewed journal, very qualified scholars. Things like that, that kind of is different, and it's a change. You're going to get some feedback that's not necessarily positive, but that's okay. People who are very resistant to things that relate to DE&I consider them to be irrelevant, inconsequential, and I go forward. And that's how I've always been. I don't let negative feedback deter me. I know what I want. I know what the goals of the institution are. I know what the mission of the institution is. And as long as you keep that in mind and not get distracted by some of these, what I would call Mickey Mouse objections, then I'm fine.
It feels a little bit like a wake-up call. You know, I think for so many people, you were quoted as saying that, you know, this particular moment of time in our country is a big opportunity for growth and change.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, you think about what's happened over the last year alone.
Yeah.
It's really a wake-up call. Can you tell us more about that, and tell us your feelings behind that, and what's our place in all of this?
Well, you know, people need to listen. They need to listen. And I was telling one of our administrators not too long ago, the issues that we're dealing with right now, you know, the shootings and the killings and those kinds of things, students feel pain. They are pained by this. And there is a physiological and a psychological toll that's taken on students and faculty as well, that has to be understood by the majority population. And students reflect that in so many different ways when they feel that the institution isn't supporting them. And I've asked Black students, for example, why is it that you say that the institution isn't really supporting you? Well, I think probably it's because the institution doesn't really understand the pain that they're going through and articulates that pain publicly. That is something that has to happen. So listening to our students, listening to our faculty, listening to our alumni about their experiences on the campus is really important for an institution's administration to focus on. That pain is manifested in so many different ways. And we need to recognize that and accept that and understand that.
Listening is an incredible skill. It's something I personally just continue to work on, and I'm sure I'll be working on for the rest of my life. Any last words before we move on to some Q&A? And we wanted to be really diligent, everyone, to leave room, because there are a lot of questions. So we'll have time for Dr. Miller to respond to some of these things. But you know, do you have any last words to share before we move on to Q&A?
Well, I have worked at 2 HBCUs, one public and one private. I've worked at 2 predominantly white institutions, one public and one private. So I've had various perspectives from those different types of institutions, especially as it relates to how race is understood and treated. The one thing I found about USD, and it didn't take me long to find out, this is an absolutely wonderful university. There are a lot of very passionate and supportive individuals at USD. And in the short time that I've been here, yes, there's work to be done. There's no question about that. But I found individuals to be very passionate, very caring, and very understanding, and recognize the need that we need to do better than we're doing. So I've had a wonderful, wonderful experience at USD. And when I leave here, as I told the president, you know, I'm going to take USD with me. I really am. And I'm going to want to know how things are going. And I am on the search committee for this vice provost position. And I can tell you, I am not going to put my stamp of approval on anyone that I don't think is really going to make a positive difference here at the university.
Great way to end. Thanks for that. You'll equally be a part of the university. I'm certain of that as you move on to bigger and greater things. I want to just thank you really quick before we move on to Q&A. That was awesome for me, and I enjoyed every minute of it. So I appreciate you allowing me to do this fireside chat with you tonight, and I learned a heck of a lot. And thanks for that little bit of Mozart at the beginning. I think that was that was amazing, and I appreciate your vulnerability. You know, I think it's such a challenge for so many of us to be vulnerable, and you showed us the way tonight. So I appreciate you very much. And with that, I will turn that over.
Can I mention one other thing?
Yeah, of course.
You know, you mentioned that I was from upstate New York, and I was born and raised in upstate New York. And I want the alumni of USD to understand one thing about me. I may be a Yankee from New York, but I am not a New York Yankee. Okay.
Yeah, I knew at some point you were gonna throw that in. I just knew it. I knew it. So, all right, I'll turn it over to Charles from there, so he can throw some great questions at you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Vince. I knew you were going to get to the Yankee thing at some point. We've had several of these conversations. It's funny too. I want to give a shout out to Megan O'Rourke, class of 2015, my colleague who's helping a little bit behind the scenes. And she and I were talking earlier, and we said, is there going to be any singing? We should have singing tonight. And sure enough, we had singing. So thank you for that, Dr. Miller. We got a lot of questions, and you covered a broad bits of them, but I'll just ask a few that came with the registration. In particular, one of which, much of USD's coursework is focused on analyzing and responding to international crises. What can we do as the US community, which USD community, students, alumni, faculty, and staff, what can we do in times of civil unrest and destabilization within the US and even within San Diego County?
Yeah, as you know, we're a global economy, and I've had the pleasure of serving as I'm a Rotarian, and I've had the pleasure of traveling abroad in a number of different countries, and I think that the international experience is just as important as a general education component of a person's education. You become much more global in your thinking. You come back to the university transformed, having had some interactions with people who don't look like you, don't talk like you, different political and religious backgrounds, and you become a much more informed and globally oriented in your thinking. And this is for both the majority and the minority students. I have strongly encouraged students who have an opportunity to travel abroad to do so.
Fantastic. We cannot wait to where that is an option again. As you may know, USD is #2 in study abroad currently, although nobody's studying abroad at the moment. So there are a number of questions about, how do we create, how do we transform our students into leaders in the field, in the ideals of diversity, equity, and inclusion as they graduate and move into the workforce. Can you address that?
I had an experience at Western Kentucky University of interviewing students for what we call the Ogden Scholarship. It's the top scholarship of the university. And these are your top academically skilled students. And there was this young man, a white student from northeastern part of Kentucky. And I asked him a question, and he never made eye contact with me. He looked down, he looked up and around when he was answering the question, but he was clearly uncomfortable with me. And after the interview was over, I went up to him and I asked him, and I said, "Young man, were you comfortable with me? Because lack of eye contact told me that you were uncomfortable with me." I said, "Have you had any interactions, any strong interactions with people who don't look like you, and African American?" He said, "Well, sir, no, I'm not comfortable with it." And I said, "Well, it was obvious. When you graduate from Western Kentucky University and you're going to interview for a position, and the person that's interviewing you looks like me, and you're going to be uncomfortable in responding to his questions or her questions, it's obvious." So I think you need to be very careful about this. And the second example is when I was at Ithaca College, where we had a very strong physical therapy program, and we interviewed our students who were graduating. We asked them the question, "What is it that you liked about your program? What was it that you didn't like?" And this young man came up to me and he said, "I really enjoyed my years at Ithaca College, and this was a strong program, but when we studied the unit on burns," he said, "I do not know what a first, second, and third degree burn looks like on a person whose skin color is dark." And I said, "Duh, out of the mouth of babes." So it's our responsibility to give them those experiences while they're here, because if we don't, we've graduated them and we've sent them out in the world unprepared. And I think that would be a travesty.
Along those lines, if it's a drinking game, everybody gets to have a shot, because I I spoke while muted. But Rob Connect, who's the chair or the president of our alumni veteran network, asks, how can students, alumni, faculty, and staff work together to create a positive DEI environment at USD? So you've covered a little bit of that, but any sort of capstone thoughts regarding how we can create that inclusive environment?
Well, I think it's important for faculty and staff as well to get to know people of color on your campus, your students and your faculty, to not be afraid to ask them questions and to listen to them. We don't have all the answers, but if I'm an African-American student and a professor comes up to me and asks me some questions that were non-threatening, and the faculty members' reason for asking the questions because they didn't know the answer and they wanted to get a perspective from the student. That student then feels, well, here's an opportunity for me to share my views and my perspectives with someone who is soliciting my input. I think that association, we talk about engagement a lot in academia, students and faculty engaging in so many different activities. That's really important. It really is. It probably happens a little bit more in athletics than it does on the academic side, but nevertheless, white faculty have to approach African Americans and people of color from the standpoint of, well, here are some things that I really would like you to help me understand, rather than, and give the student the opportunity to be the teacher and the faculty member, the staff member, the opportunity to be the student.
Sounds very logical. What does the university, or what do you consider USD's biggest DEI challenge for the next few years? That's not an easy question.
No. I think the challenge is to recognize, one of the challenges, one of many, is to recognize that there's no one size fits all in addressing DEI issues. The law school has a different approach to diversity planning than the School of Arts and Sciences or SOLS. The School of Business, for example, has only one African-American faculty member on their entire faculty. So their challenge is a little different than it is in SOLS. So recognizing the discipline-specific nature of all of our units is really important. So I think the challenge, again, is to recognize what those differences are and to address those differences, but at the same time, staying within the framework for diversity planning that the institution has accepted.